My name is Clara, and last night I almost didn't come home. Not in the way you might think. No car crash, no disaster, no hospital room with bright lights and machines. Just me, a silence so loud it hurt, and a truth I was too ashamed to say aloud. I was ready to disappear, quietly, completely, but he knew. Somehow, he always knows I didn't plan on ending up in the stable that night. It was already past 10, the wind had picked up, and the sky over the hills was cracking open with the threat of rain. I should have been inside. I should have been sleeping beside someone who swore he loved me but hadn't noticed the way I'd stopped talking weeks ago. Instead, I was outside, standing in mud, my shoes ruined, the cold creeping into my bones, and my breath trembling like the last fragile leaf in a storm, and there he was, standing still in the far corner of his stall, like he'd been waiting. His name is Rumo, a black Frisian with a stare too human for comfort, and a presence that pulls at your chest before your brain even catches up. I've had him since he was 3. I saved for years, gave up vacations, skipped dinners out, cleaned 20 stalls a week just to afford his feed. But what he gave me back, I'm only starting to understand now. I opened the stable door, and the warm, heavy scent of hay and horses hit me like a wave. It smelled like childhood, like the only place I'd ever felt safe. "Hey, boy," I whispered, my voice cracking, like dry paper. He turned his head slowly, and for a second, I almost turned around and left. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I didn't want him to see me. Not like this. I was soaked through. Hair stuck to my cheeks. Mascara smudged under both eyes like bruises. I didn't look strong. I didn't look brave. I looked exactly how I felt. Lost. And still. He walked toward me. No hesitation. No flick of doubt. Just the sound of his hooves thudding softly against the dirt floor, one after another, until he was right in front of me. Towering. Calm. Solid. He lowered his head to mine and nudged. Just once. A strong, slow nudge against my shoulder. Like he was saying, "You're not hiding from me." Not tonight. That was the first time. The first time he did it that night. He interrupted my breakdown. I crumpled to my knees, right there in the straw, gasping for air that didn't want to come. My chest burned. My heart hurt in a way that didn't feel metaphorical anymore. And as I buried my face in my hands, I could feel the tremor of a sob about to break out. But before I could fall apart, his head was there, right beside mine. Warm breath. Velvet muzzle. A soft snort. He leaned into me again. Stronger this time. My whole body shifted from the force of it. He wouldn't let me fold. Wouldn't let me sink. I tried to push him back, half laughing, half crying. "Rumo, stop!" But he didn't. He just kept pressing his head into my chest like he knew exactly how much pressure it would take to hold me together. You see, people say horses are prey animals. Skittish. Reactive. Afraid of sudden movement or pain. But Rumo has never backed away from my darkness. Not once. He stood there, motionless, breathing slow and deep until my breath started to mirror his. Until my hands unclenched. Until the knot in my throat loosened just enough for me to whisper, "I don't want to go back inside," and I didn't. Not to the apartment that felt more like a museum of silence than a home. Not to the man who kissed me out of habit, but never asked why I flinched when the lights were off. Not to the mirror that showed me a stranger. I stayed there, knees in straw, arms around the warm neck of the only living creature who didn't ask for more than I could give. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. And then it happened again. The second time. But not yet. That would come soon. And it would undo me in the gentlest way imaginable. For now, I stayed where I was, swaying gently with him as he shifted weight from one foot to the other. His breath rose in little clouds. The wind rattled the barn door, and somewhere down the hill, thunder grumbled, and still. He didn't move. He didn't get bored, didn't wander off. He just stayed. There's something sacred about that kind of stillness. When someone, or something, offers you presence without pity. Just being. Not to fix, not to change, not even to comfort. Just to exist beside you in the ache. I'd told myself for weeks that I didn't need anyone. I was lying. My silence had started as a shield and ended up as a noose. I'd gone from I'm fine to don't ask, to not speaking at all. And no one noticed, except him. Because tonight, he wouldn't leave me alone. He nudged me again, this time behind the shoulder, like he wanted me to get up. I did. Legs stiff, back aching. The hay stuck to my sweater. My hands were cold. I looked at him. What? And without waiting, he turned, walked to the far side of the stall and lay down. Flat, legs tucked. Neck arched in a way that made it clear. Come, here. Right now. I blinked. He hadn't laid down like that in over a year. Horses don't do that unless they feel utterly safe. It's a vulnerable position. It's trusting the world not to harm you. I hesitated. He snorted softly, then looked back at me. Fine. I walked over, sat down beside him. Leaning back against the warm curve of his body, I felt more human in that moment than I had in months. I don't remember falling asleep, just the steady sound of his breathing, the way his flank rose and fell beneath my hand, and the thought that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. That was only the first time he saved me that night. But there would be 2 more before dawn. If I told anyone what happened next, they'd say I imagined it. That grief distorts memory, that I'm reading too much into a gesture. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt, because when he lay down like that, it wasn't rest, it was invitation. The last thing I remembered before sleep took me was the heat of Rumo's body behind my back, the way his breathing slowed mine, the faint creak of wood as the wind pressed against the barn. That was all I needed. That and the quiet reassurance that someone, something, had chosen to stay. I don't know how long I was out. Maybe 30 minutes. Maybe longer. But when I woke up, nothing had changed. Except me. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't shaking. Instead, I was blinking through the darkness, listening to the soft snuffle of Rumo's nostrils as he exhaled, his body still pressed against mine. My legs had gone numb. My shoulders ached from tension. But my chest, it felt lighter, like some invisible hand had unhooked the clasp of a burden I didn't know I'd been wearing for years. He hadn't moved, not an inch. Just waited. That was the second time. The second thing he did that night. He lay down and waited. Waited for me to breathe again, to remember myself, to rise maybe if I was ready, but I wasn't. And he didn't rush me. I turned my head slowly and looked at him, his ears half back but relaxed, his eyes half lidded in contentment. He wasn't dozing. He wasn't bored. He was aware, present in the way only prey animals can be, the kind of stillness that's alive with attention. I reached out a hand and touched the thick, warm muscle of his neck. "You okay?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, like he was saying, "Are you?" And I didn't know what to answer, because the truth is, I had come out here to escape, not to be seen, certainly not to be held. And yet, here I was, more seen, more held, more felt than I'd been in months. How did he know? How did he always know? A tear slid down my cheek. but it wasn't from pain. Not this time. I buried my fingers into his thick mane and let my forehead rest against his shoulder. The scent of him, dust and hay and something sweet like clover, grounded me. Horses carry the earth in their skin. They don't know how to lie. They can't pretend. And that's what made it hit so hard. He meant this. He wasn't trained to comfort. He wasn't reacting to a treat. He wasn't performing for anyone. He just knew I needed him. And so he stayed. And the fact that it happened in silence made it louder than any words could have. Time passed. Outside, the wind died down. The storm, it seemed, had changed its mind. Somewhere far off, an owl called, a low, tremulous sound that made me lift my head. I shifted a little, and Rumo stirred beneath me. But he didn't get up. Not yet. He waited until I moved first. Because that's who he was. He'd never lead unless I needed following. Never demanded, never pushed. Only offered. I rubbed my hand over my face and sat up straighter. Something inside had cracked open. But it wasn't bleeding. It was breathing. And just as I began to stretch the numbness from my legs, just as I reached for the stable wall to rise, something else happened. The third thing, but not in action. In understanding. Because Rumo shifted, not to stand, not to walk away, but to press closer, as if to say, stay. Not yet. Don't go back to pretending you're fine. Don't wrap yourself up in silence again. Stay. Be raw. Be real. Be here. I looked down at him. You really aren't going to let me go back inside, are you? He didn't flinch, just stared. And in that moment, something happened that I'll never forget, not for as long as I live. He closed his eyes, fully, peacefully, and leaned his head into my lap. My breath caught. Because Rumo? He'd never done that before. He's proud. He's bold. He carries the air of a wild creature who only barely tolerates being domesticated. He bows for no one. But now he surrendered his head into my lap as if he needed me, as if the connection went both ways. And that's when I understood. This wasn't one-sided. He hadn't just saved me. We had saved each other. Because Rumo? He'd been alone too. No other horses here. No herd. Just me, day in, day out, when I wasn't too distracted, too tired, too distant. Maybe he missed me. Maybe he sensed how far away I'd been. Maybe this wasn't just my night to break. Maybe it was his too. So I stayed. I let him lie there. I stroked the long line of his cheek, tracing the shape I knew by heart, the curve from his eye to his jaw, the strong bone beneath the soft velvet skin. And I whispered, I'm sorry. Sorry I forgot how to be close. Sorry I stopped showing up the way you always did. Sorry I made you feel the way I've been feeling. And he breathed, long, deep, like he accepted it, forgave me, welcomed me back. And that was the moment I felt the shift. In me. In him. In us. Because something had reconnected, not just between woman and horse, but between souls that had been drifting in silence far too long. And as the barn lights flickered once, then steadied, I realized how dark it had become. Midnight, maybe later. I should have gone inside, but I didn't want to, and I didn't have to. Because this was more than enough. No words, no lights, just warmth, trust, breath. 3 things, 3 moments, in one night, and the last hadn't even happened yet. They always say healing doesn't happen all at once, but they never talk about the moment before it begins. That one fragile heartbeat, where you realize you're not ready to go back to the world that broke you. That moment when you try to stand, but something, or someone, won't let you. It must have been just past 1 a.m. when I tried to get up. The barn was quiet, the air still and thick with the earthy scent of hay and wood shavings. Rumo's head still rested in my lap, his breathing slow and steady, like ocean waves lapping against a shore. I didn't want to move, but guilt, the old kind, the kind stitched into your spine since childhood, started whispering again. You've stayed too long. You're being silly. He's just a horse. And worst of all, you're not worth this kind of care. I shifted gently, easing my thighs out from under his heavy neck. Rumo stirred but didn't resist. I stood slowly, brushing, straw from my back, trying to shake off the ache in my legs and the ache in my chest. I should go, I murmured to him, avoiding his eyes. He raised his head, watching me. Thanks for... earlier, I added weakly, as if this had been some casual chat between friends, as if he hadn't just held me through a storm that no human even saw. I turned to walk toward the stall door, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable thud of hooves behind me. I paused, heart in my throat. Rumo? I asked without turning. Silence. Then another step, and another. I turned slowly, and there he was. Not angry, not restless, just there, standing directly in front of the open stall door, blocking it, head high, ears forward, eyes locked on mine, a wall of muscle and willpower in the shape of a horse. Rumo, I said again, trying to keep my voice light. Move, baby, I've got to go. He didn't move, not even a flick of the ear. I took one step forward, hand outstretched, hoping to gently guide him aside, but he stepped closer, one hoof forward, then another, until we were chest to chest, my face barely a foot from his. And he exhaled, a deep, slow breath that hit my skin like warmth on a frozen window. That's when I realized he wasn't just standing in front of the door. He was keeping me from walking through it. That was the third time. The third thing he did that night. He wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. Not while I was still pretending. Not while my shoulders were still braced for a world that didn't care. Not while my heart was still tied in 100 invisible knots. I pressed my hands to his chest, gently. Come on, I whispered. Please. He didn't budge. Instead, he lowered his head to my shoulder and pushed. Not hard, not to hurt, just enough to make me step back. And suddenly I wasn't in control anymore. Suddenly it wasn't about where I thought I should go. It was about where he knew I needed to be. Back inside the stall. Back where it was warm and safe and still. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the straw again. And Rumo? He followed. Each step he took was calm, deliberate. He wasn't threatening me. He was protecting me. From the world. From the silence. From myself. I looked up at him, tears threatening again. You're not going to let me lie to myself, are you? No answer, of course. Just the heavy rise and fall of his body. Just the sound of him breathing. Present. Alive. Real. I sat down in the straw again, my back against the stall wall. He stood above me, head lowered, eyes watching, ears twitching at every sound, but never turning away. He was guarding me. Like he knew I was too fragile to face the night alone. Like he sensed something I hadn't even said aloud. I don't trust myself to go back in there. Not tonight. Not with everything unraveling. Not when the thought of crawling into that cold bed beside someone who hadn't looked at me in weeks made my skin go numb. Rumo moved closer, one hoof landing just inches from mine. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Because somehow, I trusted him more than I trusted anyone else in my life. And then, without warning, he lowered his head again, rested it against my knees, like before, heavy, warm, certain, as if to say, "Now stay, just a little longer, just until your breath evens out again, just until you remember who you were before the world taught you to shrink." And so I did. I stayed. I leaned back and let the tears fall. Not from panic, not from despair, but from something else entirely. Relief. Relief that someone had finally seen me. Not the version I wore like a mask during the day. Not the one who smiled and nodded and said, "I'm fine." But the real me. The shaking, broken, exhausted version who didn't even know she needed saving. And somehow, this horse had seen her and refused to let her leave before she was ready. We sat there like that for a long time. I lost track of how long. The barn was dark except for a single overhead bulb flickering dimly, casting golden halos on Rumo's coat. I traced patterns in the straw with my fingers. He didn't move. Not even once. And in that stillness, something inside me began to knit itself back together. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough. Enough to take one more breath. Enough to let go of the lies. Enough to believe, even for just one night, that maybe I didn't have to do this alone. Eventually, I whispered, "Okay." His ears flicked. "I'll stay." He exhaled, and this time, I think he knew. He knew what I'd almost done. He knew what I had thought, standing on that porch an hour before. He knew how close I'd come to choosing disappear over survive, and still, he stayed. 3 times. In one night. He found me when I wanted to hide. He lay beside me when I couldn't stand, and he blocked my way when I tried to run. Not with force, but with love. The kind you don't question. The kind you feel in your chest for the rest of your life. You don't notice the moment you begin to break. Not at first. It's not a shatter. It's a slow, silent fracture. A quiet undoing. And sometimes, it takes just one soul to catch the falling pieces before they scatter. That night, that soul was Rumo. And he didn't leave me. Not for a second. The air inside the barn had grown colder. But I didn't move. I stayed curled. In the straw, my back pressed against the wooden wall, my knees drawn to my chest. Rumo stood just beside me, unmoving, like a guardian carved from flesh and breath. Every so often, he shifted weight from one hoof to another. But he never stepped away. Not even when the barn creaked from the wind, not when a distant fox's cry pierced the silence, and not when my shoulders began to tremble from something far deeper than cold. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was unraveling, bit by bit, layer by layer, and I didn't know how to stop it. Rumo did. He lowered his head again and nudged my shoulder. Soft this time, almost like a question. "Still here?" I nodded silently, and then something inside me broke loose. Something I hadn't let surface in years. I whispered, barely audible. It started when I was 14. The words didn't make sense in the moment. They spilled out of me like water from a broken jug. No warning, no logic, just memory. "My father," I said next. "He left, one night. No warning. Just a note under the coffee maker and his truck gone from the driveway." Rumo's ears twitched, but he stayed close. His flank was warm against the side of my arm. I remember thinking it was my fault. I went on. That maybe if I'd kept my room cleaner, if I'd said less, if I'd been less, me. The tears came fast now, hot and bitter. But I didn't try to stop them. And then my mom just disappeared too. Not physically, but emotionally. Like she couldn't stand the sight of me anymore. Like I reminded her of what he took when he left. Rumo snorted softly, and for a moment I imagined he was sighing for me, carrying the weight of words I hadn't said out loud in more than a decade. I stopped talking after that, I whispered. Stopped crying too, and I've been silent ever since, Rumo. Even now, with my boyfriend, my friends. I laugh, I nod, I work, but none of it feels like me. I buried my face into my hands, and I think I scared myself tonight. Rumo's muzzle brushed my shoulder again, gently, persistently. I didn't want to die, I said. Not really. I just wanted to not be this anymore, to not carry this loneliness around like a second skin. You know? Of course he didn't answer, but somehow I felt understood. And in that moment, that fragile, trembling moment, I realized something else. If I had left the barn earlier, if I had forced myself to go back into that house, that bed, that shell of a life, I wouldn't have said any of this. I would have kept pretending, kept shrinking, kept suffocating behind smiles and silence. But Rumo had stopped me 3 times, and now, because of him, the truth had somewhere to land. Somewhere safe. I wiped my eyes and looked up at him again. "Why did you stay?" I asked. He blinked slowly. I smiled through my tears. "No, I know. I'm not supposed to need a reason." And then I laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. A real laugh. Quiet, but real. He huffed in response, a breathy exhale that made my hair flutter. "You're ridiculous," I murmured, "but I think you might be the only one who actually sees me." As if in agreement, he turned around and slowly, purposefully, sank back down into the straw beside me. I gasped. He hadn't done that since earlier in the night, when I was too broken to recognize it as a gift. Now I did. He lay there, eyes half closed, his head turned toward me. One leg curled slightly, as if making room for me, and I didn't hesitate. This time, I crawled toward him without second-guessing myself, and curled up alongside his massive body, letting the weight and heat of him ground me in ways no blanket or person ever had. I pressed my forehead against the rise of his ribs and felt the slow, steady beat of his heart. And that's when the fear hit. The fear of what if. What if he hadn't been here tonight? What if I hadn't come to the barn? What if I had pushed through the numbness and just vanished beneath it? The thought shook me. Tears welled again, not from sadness, but from the shock of being saved. I lifted my head just slightly and whispered, "You knew." Rumo twitched an ear. "You knew I was falling," I said. "And you caught me before I hit the ground. And I meant it. Because as I lay there with him, the straw beneath me, and the sound of his breathing like a lullaby, I realized I hadn't felt this safe in years. Maybe ever. Time passed. I didn't fall asleep again. Not really. But I drifted in and out of a half-dream state. My body stayed still, but my mind wandered. To younger versions of myself. To the scared little girl who didn't know how to ask for help. To the teenager who buried her grief in chores and horses and silence. To the woman I'd become, and the one I was about to rediscover. All the while, Rumo remained, unmoving, unflinching, unbelievably present, all night long, not just for comfort, but for witness. Because sometimes what we need most isn't someone to fix us. It's someone to say, "I see you, I'm not leaving." The barn light flickered again, and I knew dawn wasn't far off, but I didn't rush it, because the truth was, As long as Rumo stayed beside me, I could breathe. And that, in itself, was everything. I didn't know what would happen when the sun came up. I only knew one thing. I wasn't the same woman who had stepped into that barn the night before. Because 3 times, not once, not twice, but 3 distinct moments in the darkest hours of night, he had done something no human ever had. He stayed. The barn had fallen into a thick, sacred silence, the kind that settles over places where something unspoken has happened. The wind had died. The world outside had gone still. Even the animals in the nearby fields were quiet, as if holding their breath. I lay against Rumo's flank, my cheek pressed to the rise of his ribs. His breathing had slowed, and mine had followed, sinking without effort. Our rhythms were no longer separate, just one quiet pattern of inhale, exhale, survive. And then I saw it, the first glimmer of light. It broke across the horizon in a thin, golden ribbon, crawling up the cracks in the barn wall and brushing its way across the straw like a promise. Morning was coming, inevitable, undeniable, and with it, reality. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb him, though I knew he wasn't asleep. He was watching me, always watching, not with eyes that judged or demanded, but with something deeper, something that asked without pressure. Are you ready now? Was I? I didn't know, but I did know I was different. The woman who had entered this barn last night, she had been moments from disappearing. Not physically, not in a headline-worthy way, but from herself, from her life, from everything that made her real. She had been willing to vanish quietly, and no one would have noticed, except him. Rumo had noticed, and 3 times he had pulled her back. I looked down at him, my voice raw but steady. You knew. He blinked once, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like an answer. You knew I wasn't okay. And you didn't just stay. You acted. My voice cracked on the last word. Because it was true. So many people in my life had stood on the sidelines, asking if I was fine and nodding when I said yes. But Rumo? He didn't wait for words. He didn't ask for permission. He responded. When I tried to cry alone, he nudged me into his strength. When I collapsed into silence, he lay beside me like a wall against the dark. And when I tried to walk away, to go back to the version of myself I'd spent years pretending to be, he blocked the door. 3 times. I reached out and stroked the long line of his face. He leaned into my touch without resistance. I didn't know how close I was to losing myself. I whispered. But you did. You stopped it. You stopped me. A lump formed in my throat. But this one wasn't pain. It was gratitude. Deep, marrow-level gratitude that someone, something, had held on when I couldn't. Outside, the light grew brighter. I could hear birds beginning to stir, their song soft and uncertain like the morning itself. I knew I couldn't stay here. Forever. But I also knew this moment would stay with me forever. Still, I hesitated. Because leaving this barn, this quiet sanctuary where I had finally been seen, felt like walking out of safety and into a world that didn't speak this language. How? Do you explain that a horse saved you? That a creature without words reached into the center of your storm and calmed it with nothing more than breath and presence? You don't. You just carry it, like a flame in your chest, like armor, like memory. I stood up slowly and looked at him. Okay, I said. I'm going to go now, but I promise. I won't forget. Rumo rose without hesitation, as if he'd been waiting for that sentence. And then, just as I reached the stable door, he did one more thing. He walked forward and rested his head over my shoulder. Not a push, not a demand. Just a moment. One long, quiet moment that wrapped around my spine like a final embrace. I closed my eyes and leaned back into him. Let his warmth press into me. Let the silence speak. And then, just like that, he stepped back, and I walked outside. The morning air was cold, but I didn't feel it. My sweater was damp, my hair tangled, my boots covered in straw and dust. But I walked with more certainty than I had in weeks, because something had changed. Not because the world was suddenly easier, but because I was no longer carrying it alone. I reached the fence and looked back once more. Rumo was watching from the stall door, his silhouette framed by the golden light behind him. Regal, still, entirely himself. I smiled, not because everything was okay, but because I finally believed it could be. 3 times. 3 simple, profound acts. He didn't just save me. He chose me. And now, I would choose myself. I turned toward the house. The man inside still wouldn't understand. My job would still demand too much. My mother's silence would still echo. The past wouldn't magically fix itself. But I had a starting point now. A thread to follow back to who I was. A horse had given me that. Not with force. Not with speeches or pity. Just by doing 3 simple things. He stopped me when I was slipping. He held me when I couldn't stand. And he refused to let me walk away too soon, all in one night.